The Oak Ridge Reservation holds an important place in our nation's history, and it continues to be a vital part of our national security and scientific research community. But parts of the reservation require cleanup as a result of decades of energy research. The U.S. Department of Energy looks to the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board as the voice of the community on environmental issues. You're welcome to attend meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board to learn more. Call us or visit our website.
Welcome to the February 2013 meeting of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board. We have a good presentation for us tonight. Next month we will meet, our March meeting will be on the 13th, and we'll have the environmental management approach to contracting and transfer and development of properties at East Tennessee Technology Park. Before we get started, let's go over a little bit of stuff. Be sure to use your name tents to get recognized. If for any reason we need to leave this room, the staff will direct us to the right exits. Either end. Okay. Thank you very much. Now, there's nothing more said. We'll turn this over to the DOE. David, you want to start us off?
Yes, thanks, and good evening. Not a lot to report tonight. The field activities are all proceeding really without incident. One milestone, I guess a little bittersweet, the north tower of the K-25 building, they completed demolition of it about 2 weeks ago, and they're hauling away the final remnants of what's left of it. All that's left now on the K-25 building is the lower leg of the east wing, so 5 units of the east wing, and that'll be our focus for quite some time now. Offsetting the loss of the historic structure, there will be the first 6-month report on the historic preservation effort will be issued probably in the next few days. I know it was with Sue Caines for sign out today. That's a report that will be issued to Dave as the chair of the SSAB and then redistributed to anyone who's interested in it, describing where we're at on all of the things we agreed to do as part of the historic preservation agreement for the ETTP site. For the most part, it speaks to the completion of procurement and some design activities for the virtual museum and for some of the features that will be added to the site as the buildings go away, new things go up. A lot of energy in the building right now on the subject of building a budget in a somewhat chaotic budget environment. That's the subject of tonight's presentation, so I won't go into it too much, but as you can imagine, the prospect of we still don't have a complete funding profile for FY13. We're awaiting the President's budget for FY14. There's the possibility of sequestration, so it's kind of an exciting budget development year, and Alan's going to figure out how to get it all taken care of and describe how that's done. Aside from that, I really had no other comments unless people had some questions they'd like for me to try to field.
Yeah, sure.
I talked to David earlier, and he suggested that this might be a time I could raise this issue. At the present time, the DOE is very interested in deciding what to do with spent fuel to get it away from commercial reactors.
Mm-hmm.
And they put out some kind of a notice recently that people who have some interest should make that known, and I have a brief write-up on that, but the point is that in my opinion, a perfect site for that would be the old K-25 site. And I understand there's still a building, a large building there that's clean, pretty clean, which could be a great place for receiving that material. The biggest advantage would be that all of the spent fuel from a lot of reactors, somewhere perhaps 15 to 20 of the total of 104, could be shipped by water to that site. I don't know if there's any interest on the Oak Ridge, anywhere in Oak Ridge Reservation, thinking about doing that, but it certainly looks like a good possibility from my standpoint as what they call a temporary repository for that spent fuel. As I understand it, the Blue Ribbon Committee recommended that about 3 of these would be established across the country. I know of one effort looking at a site in Georgia, but it doesn't have anything like the Tennessee River and the nearness of reactors for the use of the waterways. I don't know if it's something that we need to do something about.
Well, as you might imagine, I'm not authorized to go for receipt of the nation's nuclear leftovers in Oak Ridge. I know that back in the 70s, there was actually consideration of making the MRS
Exxon actually bought options on property.
to do a monitored retrievable storage facility.
If you know where Whitestone is, it was just upstream
Hmm.
from Whitestone in that big farming area there. It just so happens that I had a friend whose father lived out there and had an option, Exxon had an option. That all fell apart, though, in the late 70s, if I remember the dates, when they really cranked up Yucca Mountain.
Right. And now Yucca Mountain's run into some troubles, but I believe that the department's focus is still on attempting to establish a permanent repository and being able to not have to employ temporary storage systems. Actually, the way, I'm not trying to sidestep a tough issue, but the way DOE is structured, you've got one column that I and Mark Whitney work for that are responsible for cleaning things up and sending waste
I
away.
understand.
Separate column that's responsible for identifying waste disposal opportunities for fuel, spent fuel from reactor facilities. So they would be the ones who would make these decisions and focus on it. And it's actually outside of EM's purview. Of course, you guys are an EM advisory board. But if you guys wanted to make a recommendation, you'd certainly have the prerogative to make a recommendation to look at using an EM site for this purpose. It would be, it goes without saying, that would be a hugely controversial proposition right now. And EM's focus for the next 10 years at that site is going to be on making it suitable for some future reuse. It will take us probably 10 more years to get it cleared off completely and available for a reuse. We're not in the business right now of picking that reuse,
But some dates that are given on this, with the encouragement to speak up now if you're interested, they're talking about having this done in 2021, which means if you're going to do anything in that period of time, it should have started last year.
Mm-hmm.
And then it is projected to go on into the 40s, at which time perhaps there would be a consideration of a reprocessing plant. Now, a lot of people don't like the idea of a reprocessing plant. As you know, the Carter administration killed that idea totally in the late 70s. The main reason for killing that was because it was the clandestine operations could use the same technology for extracting the plutonium. That no longer is an issue. The clandestine operations aren't interested in plutonium bombs anymore. It's centrifugation.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea behind the, I guess, I don't know if it was done by Congress or just executive order of the late 70s, but it was based on plutonium extraction, which clandestine operations find it so much easier to do centrifugation, just like Iran is doing now.
Mm-hmm. All right.
I don't know if anybody else would feel like, I don't know who you'd propose something to, but what you'd really need to do is to have some organization like Exxon who had an interest in making a proposal, because it's going to have to be somebody, a big organization, a composite or whatever, that'll get the contract to actually build this thing and operate it.
Yeah, it'd take that, it'd take political support from, regional delegations. It'd take a lot of things
Oh,
that are
yeah.
hard to assemble.
Well, it'd certainly bring a lot of jobs to the area.
We'll do that.
Does anybody on the board have any thoughts about how this might be something that we wanted to talk about, and maybe in committee or not? We hate to slam the door on any possible use for facilities out here, getting reindustrialized, the reservation reindustrialized. Whether this one would be the one would be a fit for us, I don't know. I couldn't answer that. We hate to slam the door on any opportunities. That's all I can say. Anybody else got a comment? Okay. All right. Okay. All right. How about, are we ready for you, John? Is it?
I have no announcements to make, but
Mr.
would be glad to attempt to answer any questions the board may have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Connie Jones, EPA liaison.
Thank you. I just have a few I'd like. I don't know if I'll be speaking out of turn here, but there's been some negotiations between the EPA and DOE regarding some milestones. We all know that money's tight, but I think that we're looking and focusing on how we prioritize certain projects, so it's nothing major. I want to report on some small but still significant remedial actions occurring at the ETTP site. Of course, you all know that the North Tower is down, and the UCOR project team is very busy doing small remedial actions around the Tosca incinerator area and the CNF. I don't have any other announcements, but I'll be more than happy to attempt to answer questions if asked. Yes,
Go ahead,
You
John.
mentioned Tosca.
yes.
In the paper recently, there was a comment that a lot of German material had been burned by a company out at near the interstate. Did they do that at Tosca? Did they do it in that smaller unit there next to the interstate?
I'm not familiar with that. Maybe John could.
Yeah, basically, the Tosca facility would only receive material from other federal facilities. So anything that comes from a German facility or any other commercial facility wouldn't have come to
Wouldn't have gone to
No, it'd go to one of the commercial facilities out on Bear Creek or out by the interstate. There are two.
Well, is Tosca still operating? at
No,
all?
it's completely shut down. It's been decommissioned. It's just a shell of a building that is awaiting final tear down.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add that the German waste was incinerated by Energy Solutions
Yeah.
at their facility on Bear Creek Road,
Oh,
not the
Bear
one
Creek,
next to
okay.
the interstate.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Noe, I believe I jumped over you. You have anything for us?
No, my time doesn't come till the end of the program.
I thought you might have a comment for Ms. Gaines. Yeah, okay, all right, very good then. All right, with that, we need to open up for the public comment committee portion of our program. David?
The public comment period is now open. No one had signed up. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak? Seeing none, as a Citizens Advisory Board to the Department of Energy on environmental cleanup, we want to encourage the community at large to attend and participate in our board and committee meetings. If you are unable to attend, please send in your questions and comments to the address as shown on the screen. Appropriate comments and questions will be read during the public comment section of the SSAB meeting and will be given the same consideration by the board and DOE as those given in person. Meeting schedules and ways to communicate with the board can be obtained by calling area code 865-241-4583 or visiting our website.
Thank you, David. Okay, it's time for our presentation. Now, David, would you please introduce our presenter?
I would. Alan Stokes, who is the presenter tonight, is the Director for Planning and Baseline Management Division of the Oak Ridge EM Program Office. Alan is a certified public accountant and has over 25 years of budgeting, estimating, and project controls experience in the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. Alan's degree is in accounting from Florida State University, and Alan does reside in Knoxville.
I recognize a few faces from last year. I was given the opportunity to discuss the budget this time last year, so I recognize a few faces. Budget is one of those topics that you either really enjoy or you really don't enjoy. So I hope that I can make it at least understandable and maybe even enjoyable for you for this presentation. As I was preparing this presentation, I was asking myself questions that if I were in the audience, I would want answers to. Things like, what is the Oak Ridge EM budget for this year? What's going to be our budget for next year? And even for the possible curious folks, what is the fiscal path that our country's heading down? Well, the unfortunate part is the uncertainties that Dave Adler mentioned earlier regarding our federal government budget process right now makes it very difficult for me to give you any specific hard answers. I had mentioned that I was asking myself questions while I was preparing this presentation, and it reminded me of two guys at work that were very competitive, always trying to outdo one another. And one of the guys went up to the other right before lunch and said, "Tell you what, I'm going to ask myself a question, and if I can answer it, you buy lunch." Well, of course, the other guy said, "I'll have no part of that. Thank you very much." So the first guy wouldn't let that go. He said, "Okay, then I'll ask myself a question. If I can answer it, then you get to ask yourself a question. And if you can answer it, then we'll just keep going back and forth until somebody can't answer their question. Then that person buys lunch." Well, the other guy, being competitive, decided, "Yeah, I can outdo him. Why not? Let's go ahead." Agreed to the challenge. First guy started, and the question that he asked himself was, how does a rabbit dig a hole in the ground for its young without leaving a mound of dirt outside the hole? The other guy said, thinking to himself, "That's a really good question. I've wondered that myself." As he was waiting for the first guy to answer the question, and the answer the first guy said was, the rabbit starts digging the hole from the inside out. Before the other guy could catch himself, he blurted out, "How in the world does a rabbit do that?" To which the first guy replied, "That's your question, and I'm going to have steak for lunch." I had mentioned that my ability to answer some of these questions that you would have regarding the budget is complicated by the uncertainties that we've got in the federal government budget process right now. So to kind of give you a context of how chaotic was the word that Dave used, it is, if we compare what we knew this time last year about the budget process to what I know this year, it might help put it in context. As you know, the federal government operates on a fiscal year calendar. And that fiscal year starts October 1 and ends in September. So this fiscal year ends September 30th, 2013. So we call that fiscal year 13. The fiscal year date is based on when that calendar month ends. So September 30th, 2013 is the fiscal year 13. This time last year, we knew what our current full year appropriation was by Congress. This year, for FY13, we only have a budget that's been appropriated by Congress through March. So I only know what half of my year's funding is right now. A lot of speculation on what the next half is, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through, but that's one context. The next one is the next fiscal year's budget, which would be FY14. this time last year, we would have known what that budget was. The president would have revealed it and submitted it to Congress a couple of weeks ago, usually in the first week of February. That's not been done yet, and we have not been told what our budget's going to be that's presented to Congress yet for the next fiscal year. The following fiscal year, which this year's FY15, is the budget formulation year that we're here to discuss. Normally, we would have guidance from headquarters that would give us a little insight into what that FY15 budget's going to look like, and we don't have that yet either. And given where we are with the 13 and 14, it's probably going to be a month or two before we even get word on the FY15 budget. But that doesn't mean that we haven't started and shouldn't start planning for that FY15. So with that, the thing, this chart is going to talk about, before we get into the actual numbers, I thought it might be helpful if we look at the process. Some of you are probably wondering, as I did when I first got into the budget world, why in the world are we worrying about fiscal year 15 when that's still a year and a half away? Well, this helps, I hope helps, got the wrong one. This schedule here, I think, would help put that in context and why we're starting so early on formulating the FY15 budget. And budget formulation strictly means that we're preparing and developing the FY15 budget to go to Congress. The budget formulation process starts for FY15, would start in January of this year, so January 13. And it starts with headquarters giving the field guidance. And so far, we've not gotten that yet. It's usually in the winter time frame. It's probably going to be March, maybe even April before we get that. The sites start developing their budget. In this case, it would be the FY15 budget. We start doing that in this time period, the winter time period. And as we're developing this budget, we're getting input and meetings with TDEC and EPA, our regulators, and our stakeholders, this robust group. I do have this word advice here, and it was pointed out to me that the regulators don't give us advice. We consult with them. So the better word to use here would be input for the regulators, and actually even for the SSAB. But as part of this formulation process, we do get input from our regulators and from SSAB. And once we get that input, we'll finalize our budget and submit it normally in the April time frame, but it's probably going to look more like May. Once we submit that budget, then this embargoed word comes about, and when the budget is in this process at headquarters, it becomes embargoed, and usually I don't even get information on what's happening once it gets up into the headquarters arena. This is the time frame that you can see. It's quite a bit of time frame involved, and to help understand why it takes this long to put that budget together is, remember, it's just Oak Ridge. Here's Oak Ridge submitting their budget. All of the other field offices are submitting their budget to the EM office at headquarters. So EM in this time frame has to consolidate all the field budgets, get their decision on what they're going to send forward to the DOE CFO, which is the Chief Financial Officer, the budget office, who then has to put together all of the other programs, their science, NE, the national security budget. All that's happening during this process. And then finally, DOE has to submit its budget to OMB. That's the President's Budget Office, Office of Management and Budget, who then consolidates all the budgets for the entire federal government, all of the other departments, Department of Defense, Department of Education, etc. So all that takes time, and it's just kind of building blocks. The higher up you go, the more budgets are coming together, kind of like creeks flowing into a river. And at a major event in this process is in the late summer time frame. DOE submits its budget to OMB. And Usually in the fall time frame, it's the OMB consolidating all of the federal agencies' budgets along with DOE's, and then finally culminates with the President submitting the budget in February. So our FY15 budget next February, if it follows the normal process, would go to Congress. So here's what we do know. Here's what I can tell you. Remember, FY13 covers the period October 1 through September 30th of 2013. So we're almost 5 months, we're almost halfway through the fiscal year. Our budget that was submitted to Congress last February for FY13 was $420 million. Normally, we would have an appropriation from Congress that would tell us what our funding is going to be for the entire fiscal year. All I have right now is a continuing resolution, and that's the term that Congress uses when they pass a budget for a portion of the year as opposed to the full year. And it was for 6 months, which is really a good thing because sometimes we get continuing resolutions in 1 month to 2 month cycles. So it's much better to get it all in, if it's going to be for 6 months, to get it all at one time. So that was good. That helped us in planning. But as an order of magnitude, you can see that it's not quite half of what our request was. This is what we've been planning to and hoping to get. Half of that would be 210. This is a little bit less than that. And that difference between what we actually got and half of what we've been planning to has had an impact at ETTP. Specifically, the progress that we had planned to make on K-25 and K-27 was slowed down because of us not getting half of what we had planned. The good news here, though, is we did have about $50 million worth of Recovery Act, and that's that, if you recall, back in 2009, there was the stimulus bill. That was a term that they used, and Oak Ridge got $750 million back in 2009. That was part of the American Reinvestment and Recovery Act appropriation. And we're now down to $50 million, and we're going to spend the rest of that this fiscal year. This gives you, I wanted to compare our FY13 President's budget. If you remember from the previous chart, that was the budget that went to Congress last year for FY13. Compared to FY12, this is what we actually received last fiscal year. Two things I want to point out, starting out with, is the term I used was an appropriation that we get from Congress. There are multiple appropriations. If you went and looked at the federal budget, there's hundreds of them. We get 2 of them. One is called the Defense Environmental Management Appropriation, and we, along with all of the other DOE sites, share in this appropriation. The D&D fund is another appropriation that we get from Congress. We and only Lexington, which is the Paducah-Portsmouth sites, the sister gaseous diffusion plants sites at Paducah and Portsmouth, we're the only ones that share in this fund. So everybody in DOE gets this, only us and Lexington get this money. This money is used to do ETTP cleanup, and you can see last year we got $200 million, and we were planning to get $221. But because the continuing resolution was based on last year's appropriation, we only got half of this. So you can see we were hoping that we would have gotten half of this, 110. We only got 100. So we had a $10 million difference between what we had planned for at ETTP and what we actually got. That's why there was an impact to slowing down work on 25 and 27. On the defense side, it's the opposite problem. We got more money in 12 than we were asking and needing in 13, so we're in pretty good shape in the defense appropriation for this year and the continuing resolution. I've broken down the defense appropriation into I call it funding accounts. Just view these as bank accounts, separate bank accounts. And Congress gives us this defense appropriation in 5 different bank accounts. And we can't move money back and forth between these without Mother May I. So, in essence, we are somewhat constrained to each of these funding accounts, what we can use those for. This, of course, is the processing and disposition of the U-233 material that's in Building 3019 at ORNL. If you notice, there's a blank amount here in 13 in the President's budget. I'll note you down here that when we submitted the President's budget request in 13, the decision was to include the U-233 in this bank account. And in essence, the bigger a bank account is, the more flexibility you have to fund things within that account. But there is $30 million in this number for U-233. The rest of this funding in this account is for TWPC, Transuranic Waste Processing Center. This is where we process our true material. It's funded out of this bank account. This is the safeguard and security. It's the guard force that protects ETTP and keeps it secure. And this is the rest of our funding that we get for ORNL and Y12, where for 12 and 13, basically all we're doing there is some waste operations and surveillance and maintenance of excess facilities. We just don't have a lot of money in here to do any remediation or D&D work at ORNL. And then finally, we have the stakeholder support funding account, which funds the TDEC grants. I think there's 3 of those, and funds your SSAB support is funded out of here as well. I said that we don't know yet. We've only got half of an appropriation, half a year's appropriation, 6 months worth of funding for our President's budget request. We're not sure yet what the second half funding is going to be, but the worst case that we're looking at right now, which I think everybody's heard on the news, the sequestration word, or falling off the cliff, if that happens, then instead of getting 421, we would get, it's between 5 to 7.5% reduction to what we got in FY12. So we would get somewhere in $394 million is the best number I can come up with right now. So right now all I can say is what I think our FY13 budget will be. It'll be somewhere between $394 million and $421. But if I was a betting person, I would bet closer to the 394 number than the 421. When we go to build our budgets, as you can imagine, we break our work down into discrete components, work that we need to do. And then it's critical that we prioritize that work because we have constrained funding. We just don't have unlimited funding. So we do have to break our work down into discrete pieces and decide which work are we going to do and in what order. And we call that our prioritization process. And to guide us in doing that prioritization process is these basic principles. If you will, these are kind of overarching concepts and principles that we use when we go about doing our prioritization. First and foremost is we've got to keep our workers and the public safe. That's first and foremost. So we're not going to jeopardize our worker or public or the environment, health or safety in doing our prioritization and building our budgets. Second, we always got to keep in mind that we have regulatory commitments that we've already made to the regulators, and that's in the form of our federal facility agreement, which meets the circular requirements, as well as our site treatment plan or STP commitments that we've made under RCRA. We also have to keep in mind that we do environmental management, does do work at our 2 sister sites, ORNL, which is a science-funded site. They do state-of-the-art research. And we've also got our national security NNSA site at Y12. We do work at those sites, so we do have to take into account that we are a guest on those sites and that we would not do anything to jeopardize their ongoing missions. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. And last but not least, we're always concerned about the local economy, and we would not want to do any, or at least give consideration to the existing contracts and workforce that we already have in place as we do our prioritizations. Now, if we get down to the scopes of work, the work that we need to do, over the next 3 years, 13 through 15, here's what our current considerations and priorities are. We call these our near-term priorities. Of course, first and foremost is to get K-25 on the ground and the debris hauled off. And we think we can accomplish that by FY15. Of course, that's without any major significant funding cuts. The next priority is, because of some synergy that we gain with the workforce, the trained and cleared workforce that we have at K-25, K-27 is also way past its design life. We need to go start working on that building. That's our next concern. And we have workforce that can move over and start working on K-27. So while we're working on 25, we want to get K-27 ready for demolition. We've also, I'm sure you've heard a lot about our U-233 program right now, the inventory that we have in Building 3019. We can direct dispose of it, which saves us a lot of money from having to process it. So we want to finish up and get close to finishing that direct disposition campaign. We also have the Transuranic Waste Processing Center that we want to continue operating and processing the true waste inventory that we have, the contact handled, remote handled debris waste that we have. And then finally, but not least, is a new concept here that I don't think I discussed last year. We've decided that this Y12 outfall 200 mercury treatment system is a top priority for handling the mercury. And the philosophy here is, if we can capture mercury leaving the site, that makes more sense to do that and then proceed with trying to go after the mercury that is on site. So that's the concept behind this. We think that's $100 to $150 million project. That's my estimate. We don't have the formal estimates yet, so don't hold me to that. And probably 4 to 5 years to put that in place. Then if we look at the midterm activities over the next 10 years in this time frame, we will complete the U-233 material disposition, and we also have some of the material that's going to require processing. We will be able to complete that in this time frame. We're also believe that we can complete processing all the Transuranic CH and RH contact handled and remote handled inventory that we have on site in this time frame. And we can get ETTP closed. That frees up a lot of money in our budget that we can then start putting towards ORNL and Y12. We also want to finish construction and start operations on this mercury treatment facility again to capture any mercury that's leaving the site. And then start going after those mercury use buildings at Y12 to start capturing and getting after the mercury that may remain on the site. And then the long-term focus, we think at our current funding targets that we're looking at, that we've been planning against, it's going to take us till the 40s to finish cleaning up Y12 and ORNL. Last slide already. Here's how we see our path forward. This is for the FY15 budget formulation. First, I got to know what my 13 funding is going to be for the whole year. And I got to know what my FY14 budget's going to be so I can understand what scope am I going to be able to get done in 13 and 14 with the funding that I'm going to get. So it's critical I know these two pieces first. Then I can start proceed with, here's the scope then that remains and what we can start planning on in 15. We are planning a public workshop to discuss the budget development. I think that's in March. We're looking at scheduling that. I'm not sure it's been scheduled yet, has it? Okay. And then, of course, we need the formal recommendation and input from the SSAB on our FY15 budget, and I believe there'll be some subcommittee groups that will help come up with that recommendation. We'll evaluate the prioritization input that we get from TDEC and EPA along with the SSAB, and then submit our budget to headquarters. This would normally be done in April, but I'm betting it'll go into May this year. So that's all I had.
Okay, we'll open up the floor
We'll
to
open it.
questions. Okay, Bob?
Yes, sir.
How do you make your projections for just the rest of this fiscal year when you have really nothing to work with? Do you model it based on what you have on hand or last year's budget?
Well, we have work already under contract that's underway, so we know if we just continued that level of operations, we know what our cost would be, and we get some preliminary planning numbers from headquarters. We're running a bunch of different scenarios on if we got the worst case versus the best case, and we've planned right now towards the worst case. So we believe that if we do get the worst case, we can live with that.
Thank you.
Greg?
Ellen,
Yes,
thank you.
Greg.
I was in that last year.
Yes, sir.
And
I
I have
remember
a
you.
simple question. You really can't do this till you get the information from upstairs.
Do what? To
The whole
formulate this
budget
15?
process. Till you get the rest of we'll find out what your 13 budget is and find out what your target is in the 14 budget. And DOE has not given that to you. Do they allow you to take your first slide with your bullets and your milestones and move them day for day to the left or to the right based on how delinquent they are with giving you information? Or do you still have to meet your deadlines of having
No,
this done
no,
by
it's-
mid-April?
Normally, because it's headquarters that's
Right.
they're
holding you up.
they're trying to catch up as well. Once their numbers and process starts flowing again, that will flow down to us. We'll have time to be able to do that. Now, I will say that doesn't stop us from going ahead and planning in anticipation of getting a number. We're doing that.
Right.
It's then, so we're not having to start from scratch or from bottoms up when we do get it. We already have some preliminary planning information. Then it's just a matter of tweaking that based on what final numbers we get from them.
Thank you.
Jimmy?
On your different funding accounts, the ETTP, Safeguard and Security, $20 million.
Yes, sir.
Tell me what are you doing? It costs $20 million in Safeguard and Security. And my question really sort of comes down to my belief that there's nothing out there that needs to be confidential in terms of technology. So where's that money? Give me an idea of what you're doing with it.
The majority of it consists of a variety of safeguard and security activities. The majority of it is the protective force, the guards, and most of those are at ETTP. And they do a vulnerability assessment of what is the security risk at ETTP, and that's what drives the required number of guards that we're required to have. And if I'm not mistaken, I don't think our risk at ETTP really drops until we get 25 and 27 on the ground. So we still have what the security experts consider to be a risk that drives the pro force or security guards that we're required to have. There's also funding, this also funds the security clearances that all of our contractors' workforce has to have. It funds cybersecurity, which is counterintelligence threats, as well as internal computer security of our contractors. So it's a variety of things, but again, the majority of it is the guard force.
Does it include protecting the nickel and the,
Do you know the answer? I'm not sure how that factors into the security risk.
The current reality is that a lot of the technology at the site remains classified, even though Iran and everyone else has moved on and no one's looking to use that technology to enrich uranium. It does remain classified. So the converters and the barriers are a classified technology, and unless that changes,
and that's a lot of your guard force.
that is a lot of the guard force. There's also
That's my opinion, that's a total waste of time,
right.
but I understand.
There's also still some what do they
Okay.
call it? Basically residues of built up enriched uranium throughout the facility that also have to be guarded. But as those go away, and when, as Alan said, when 25 and 27 are gone, all of the converters will be gone. Essentially all of the highly enriched uranium deposits will be gone. We should see a significant drawdown in the costs required to keep safeguards and security requirements met.
Okay, let me go another one. On the 233, the direct disposition, and maybe someone has told me this before, but where's it going? The 233?
It's they're anything they can give to someone for reuse, they're doing. And they're actually
that's a
there's a
small part.
relatively small quantity of it, and the balance of it's being taken to the Nevada test site.
Yeah.
Actually, the NNSS site, but it's the area where they did the former tests out in Nevada, and it's disposed of out there in the desert.
It's actually disposed of, or is it just stored?
It will be disposed of, yeah. It's being disposed of at the Nevada test site disposal facility.
One day when you learn the answer to how do you dispose of 233, I'd like for you to explain that to me.
Well, the basic proposition is to downblend it.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. And then to dispose of it so that it meets the acceptance criteria for that facility out there.
DOE's got a policy that you don't do any diluting. You don't solve problems by dilution.
Well, yeah.
But okay, I'll quit. I'll drop on that. This system about the mercury at Y12, where'd you get the idea that it's best to process the mercury leaving rather than go back and attack the source? My convention is that if I really want to attack something that's doing me bad, you kick it in the head and chop it off so that you don't have anything leaving the site. And if you spend all your money and your time treating it as it leaves the site, you may never get to the point to actually clean it up at the origin.
Go ahead, Dave.
I can help on that one too. The cost for a water plant that services the drainage point for the entire mercury facility's drainage is in the range of $100 to $150 million. The cost of getting at the source that we'd all love to kick in the head is in the
Billions.
It's $1 billion, billion
Yep.
five. We do need to go at that, but the expectation, and it's borne out by recent sewer line work we've done, when you get in there and start tearing things down and cleaning things up, you tend to kick up some mercury that tends to flush out of the site. So building this water plant first both has the effect of resulting hopefully in some relatively near term, years, but near term reduction in the effluent that leaves the plant, and also setting up a capture system that will deal with fugitive releases that occur as we D&D the facilities. So DOE, EPA, and TDEC have shifted exactly as you've described from getting at what's under the plant first to getting at what's leaving the plant first, with the expectation that that system will also be available to get at what may be stirred up and inclined to leave the plant as we go after the building D&D activity. So that it is a fundamental shift in approach that's taken place in the last 18 months.
And it will take years to get after that $1 billion
It will.
approach. It will take years to get the actual source out.
Thank you.
We open up the floor to questions from the audience here. Please. Got a mic?
Thank you. I'm Susan Gowerecki. I've got a couple of questions. Where in the prioritization, and is it long-term or mid-term, is the proposed second CERCLA waste disposition cell?
Actually, in the midterm activities, Susan, we realize we're going to have some more capacity to do that. So it would be in this time frame. We would need to have another cell built to accommodate the waste, particularly in this time frame.
Okay. And back in 2007, DOE came to an agreement with the state that they would fund their cleanup at levels of 500 to 550 million a year, and they've never achieved that since. Has the state formally released DOE from that?
Yes, ma'am. We have the latest agreement that we have establishes an expectation of $420 million for the next 5 years, and then a nominal escalation rate from 2018 through 2043. And so that's our current agreement.
And when do we anticipate the cleanup being completed? 2043?
2043. Barring no reductions in the...
Yeah, that's at this funding level.
Yes.
That's if we get this funding level.
Okay, and my final question is, what are we doing to raise Oak Ridge's priority at DOE's national level? Because we're competing against Hanford, Savannah River site, and some of the other sites that have much larger budgets than we do. But nonetheless, we've got higher population density, some very complex cleanup problems, and still seem to be getting the short end of the stick.
Well,
in the allocation area, not just the appropriation area.
That's an excellent question. We share that same quest. I can say that Mark and Sue and Mark's predecessor, John Eschenberg, are very adamant about pursuing headquarters, going to them and making a case for Oak Ridge that we are investment worthy, that we do have some serious priority needs and would be warranted in getting additional funding. We actually did get in FY12 is a little bit better than we were in FY11, and I think some of that is the fruit of their labor. As you know, in today's budget environment, I would be happy to sustain this level. We do have a good case. We were actually talking about it earlier this week that it dawned on us. Susan's talking about the EM priorities. Demolition is the lowest priority at DOE headquarters. And we started to realize that at most sites, the buildings, their excess facilities are ordinary run-of-the-mill buildings. They're not nuclear categorizations buildings with the hazards and radiological contaminations we have. And we're not sure that point has been nailed home at headquarters, and they understand it as well as we do, that distinguishes us from the other sites. So that is an area that we're going to start pursuing with headquarters, that they try to understand the unique contamination that we have at Oak Ridge that's not as proliferate at the other sites.
I guess I had one last question about K-25, the remaining part is the, has got the, the difficult isotope. Technetium, right. What's happening with that? Do we have a disposal pathway for that debris? Has the state approved it going to
Well-
the Circula cell, or is it going to have to go out west?
Let me give some information and then allow John to add in as he sees fit. At one point, the thinking was that most or all of the last 5 units, 5 buildings in that wing would have to be shipped out west at quite significant expense. There's been a lot of work done to better understand where the technetium is and is not over the past 18 months or so. And what they're learning is that a significant portion of that facility may be worthy, if you will, eligible for disposal on site because the technetium is largely concentrated in a few areas. Of the 5 units that remain, it appears that the first 2 are in pretty good shape for disposal locally. Of the remaining 3, if we can go in and selectively remove some areas where the technetium is most accumulated, what's left appears to be sufficiently dilute from a technetium standpoint for local disposal also. That's not an agreed upon thing yet. We're going through that right now with EPA and the state in terms of getting the information we need, providing the waste profiles that build the case that this pile can go this way and this pile can go that way. But there has been a shift in thinking from one that we really will need to take everything out west to some significant portion of it can probably be managed locally. And the big benefit to that, of course, is reduced cost. So.
Thank you, Susan. Greg?
I think John just wanted to add in something.
I was going to attempt to provide the state's position on the technetium contaminated equipment being disposed of on site. As Dave said, we and EPA are in discussions with the Department of Energy over the characterization of that equipment. And when we come to an agreement on an appropriate level of characterization, that equipment that meets the on-site disposal criteria will be eligible for on-site disposal, but the state is not prepared to consider modifying the technetium criteria to allow more waste to go into the on-site facility.
Okay, I had actually heard that K-27 has considerably more technetium contamination than K-25. Is that a looming issue?
I actually don't.
I don't have any direct.
Yeah. Connie may know more about technetium than I on that.
That had been the theory, that 27 and the operations of 27 caused a lot more contamination inside the building, but we haven't had the opportunity to characterize K-27 to the extent that we have 25. So that's still an unknown, even though there was some early work done by the previous contractor to try to remove some material. We still don't have a good data or good evaluation of what's left.
The research and national defense facilities of the Oak Ridge Reservation are vital parts of our nation's scientific community. To continue to meet these needs, parts of the reservation require cleanup from the impacts of years of energy research. The Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board is the voice of the community, providing input to the U.S. Department of Energy on its environmental cleanup of the reservation. To learn more about this important work, you're invited to attend meetings of the Oak Ridge Site-Specific Advisory Board.